Admiral Jack Miller sat in the cold metal chair and watched the alien creatures talk about his people like they were children. The huge room around him was built to make visitors feel small. Crystal walls stretched up so high he could not see the top. Strange lights floated in the air without making any sound. 12 different alien species sat on platforms that hung in the air above him. Jack had been coming to these meetings for 10 years now. Every time, it was the same story. The aliens would talk in their fancy way about keeping peace in the galaxy. They would make new rules that humans had to follow. They would say no to anything humans wanted to do. Today felt different, though. Jack could feel anger burning in his chest like a hot coal. Behind him sat Captain Lisa Hayes and Dr. Alan Porter. Lisa was the best ship captain Earth had ever produced. Alan was the smartest scientist alive. Both of them looked as angry as Jack felt. The creature talking now looked like it was made of blue glass. Its voice sounded like wind chimes in a storm. This was Counselor Veltar, one of the leaders of the Galactic Council. Jack had learned to hate that musical voice over the years. The human request for expansion beyond the Kepler system is denied, Veltar said. Humans remain too unpredictable for such freedom. The Council has spoken. Jack felt his hands squeeze into fists. For 50 years, ever since the aliens first came to Earth, humans had tried to be good members of the galactic community. They followed the rules. They paid their taxes. They sent their brightest people to serve on alien worlds. And what did they get in return? Nothing but more rules and more restrictions. The humans were only allowed to live on 3 worlds: Earth, Mars, and one small colony called New Boston. Meanwhile, other alien races had hundreds of worlds each. The Council said humans were too dangerous to have more space. They said humans made too many weapons and asked too many questions. Creature that looked like a giant insect clicked its mandibles. Furthermore, it said in a voice like breaking glass, all human ships must now carry Council navigation controls. No human vessel may travel without Council permission. That was the last straw. Jack had spent his whole life in the Space Navy. He had fought pirates in the asteroid belt. He had rescued stranded ships in the outer planets. He had bled for humanity among the stars. And now these aliens wanted to put chains on every human ship. Dr. Porter leaned forward and whispered, Jack, remember the plan. This is what we expected. Jack nodded slowly. For 5 years, a secret group of humans had been preparing for this moment. They called it the Independence Protocol. While the Council thought they had humans under control, the humans had been building ships in hidden locations. They had been training crews for long missions. They had been getting ready to leave. President Susan Clark back on Earth knew about the plan. General Frank Stone knew about it. Thousands of humans across the solar system knew about it. They were all waiting for Jack's signal. Jack stood up slowly. His chair made a loud scraping sound on the crystal floor. All 12 alien counselors stopped talking and looked down at him. In all the years the Council had existed, no one had ever interrupted a session. Counselor Veltar, Jack said in a clear, strong voice, I have something to say. The blue crystal alien tilted its head. Humans do not speak unless given permission in this chamber. I don't need your permission anymore, Jack said. He pulled out a datapad from his uniform pocket. I hereby formally withdraw humanity from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. The huge chamber fell completely silent. Jack could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Even the floating light seemed to dim. This is impossible, said a creature that looked like a metal spider. No species has ever left the Council. Well, we're the first, Jack said. He looked up at all 12 counselors. Furthermore, we are invoking Article 847 of the Galactic Compact, the right of sovereign withdrawal. Every Council installation in human space has 72 hours to pack up and leave. Now the chamber exploded with noise. Aliens were shrieking and clicking and making sounds Jack had never heard before. Warning lights began flashing red all around the room. Somewhere in the distance, alarms started wailing. Veltar raised one crystalline hand and the noise stopped. Admiral Miller, you do not understand the consequences of this action. Humanity cannot survive without the Council's protection. Jack smiled for the first time in months. Counselor, we've been surviving just fine for millions of years before we met you. I think we'll manage. The other species will not trade with you, said the insect creature. You will have no access to advanced technology. Your people will suffer. Maybe, Jack said. But they'll suffer as free people, not as pets in a cage. Captain Hayes stood up behind him. The UES Defiant is waiting at docking port 7, she said quietly. Time to go, Admiral. Dr. Porter also stood. I've already sent the signal to Earth, he whispered. Operation Independence is now active. Jack looked around the chamber one more time. These aliens had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. They thought they owned everything and everyone in it. Today they learned that humans could not be owned. Counselors, Jack said with a slight bow. It's been educational. But we're done taking orders. He turned and walked toward the exit. His boots clicked loudly on the crystal floor. Behind him, Lisa and Alan followed. The three humans walked through the massive doors that led out of the chamber. Behind them, the aliens were still making noise. Some were angry, some were confused. Some seemed scared. Jack didn't care anymore. After years of sitting quietly and accepting whatever scraps the Council threw to humanity, it felt good to finally say no. As they walked down the long corridor, toward the docking bay, Jack's communication device beeped. He looked at the screen and saw a message from Earth. President Clark had just addressed the world. She told everyone about humanity's withdrawal from the Council. She explained that while humans had tried to be partners with the aliens, they would not accept being slaves. The response is better than we hoped, Lisa said, reading her own device. Colony ships are already launching from the hidden shipyards. General Stone says the fleet will be ready to depart in 6 hours. And the other alien species? Jack asked. Alan smiled. Intelligence reports are coming in from across the galaxy. 3 different species have sent secret messages asking how we did it. The hegemony worlds are openly talking about leaving the Council too. I think we just started something big. They reached the docking bay where the Defiant waited. It was a human ship built with human hands and human ideas. It might not be as pretty as the alien ships, but it was strong and it was free. Jack looked back one more time toward the Council chamber. In a few hours, news of humanity's withdrawal would spread across the entire galaxy. Some aliens would be angry. Some would be scared. But some, Jack hoped, would be inspired. For the first time in 50 years, humans were going to find out what they could really do when no one was holding them back. The thought made Jack smile as he stepped aboard his ship and prepared to leave the Council's control forever. President Susan Clark stood in front of the cameras and looked directly into the lens. Behind her, Earth slowly turned in the view from the orbital station. Cities sparkled like jewels on the night side of the planet. Susan had practiced this speech 100 times, but now that the moment was here, her heart was beating fast. My fellow humans, she began. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in our history. We have withdrawn from the Galactic Council, not out of anger, but out of hope. We came to the stars not to bow down, but to stand tall among the cosmos. In living rooms across Earth, families gathered around their screens. On Mars, miners stopped their work to listen. On New Boston Colony, children pressed close to their parents. Everyone knew this day would come eventually. The aliens had pushed, too hard for too long. Susan continued her speech. The Council wants us to be grateful for the small cage they built around us. But humans were not made to live in cages. We explore, we build, we dream of better things. Today, we choose freedom over safety. We choose hope over fear. When the speech ended, Susan walked to the window and looked down at Earth. In a few hours, everything would change. Hidden across the solar system, secret shipyards were already coming alive. Ships that had been built in secret for years were powering up their engines. General Frank Stone stood in the command center of the hidden base on Titan. Around him, screens showed hundreds of ships preparing to launch. For 5 years, he had been planning this moment. The Independence Protocol was more than just leaving the Council. It was about showing the galaxy what humans could really do. Status report, Frank said to his aide, Colonel Bob Williams. All ships ready, sir, Williams replied. The convoy, Fleet is assembled. Captain Blake reports the UES Frontier is prepared to lead the expedition beyond the rim. Frank nodded. The plan was bold, maybe even crazy. Instead of just hiding in human space, they were going to leave the galaxy entirely. Long-range probes had detected strange signals from the void between galaxy arms. While the Council kept all species focused on the crowded galactic core, humans were going to see what lay beyond. Captain Tony Blake sat in the command chair of the UES Frontier and watched his crew make final preparations. The ship was unlike anything the Council races had ever built. Where alien ships were sleek and efficient, human ships were tough and adaptable. They could take damage and keep fighting. They could be repaired with basic tools and spare parts. Navigation. Are we ready? Tony asked. Lieutenant Carl Davis looked up from his station. Yes, sir. Course plotted for the galactic rim. Estimated travel time to the target zone is 8 months. Communications. Signal the fleet, Tony said. It's time to go. Behind the frontier, 300 ships began moving. Cargo vessels carried supplies for building new colonies. Science ships held laboratories and research equipment. Transport ships were packed with families who had volunteered for the journey into the unknown. Everyone knew they might never see Earth again. Dr. Nina Cross stood on the bridge of the research vessel UES Discovery and watched the convoy form up. As humanity's chief xenobiologist, she had studied every alien species in the Council. Now, she was hoping to find something entirely new in the empty space beyond the galaxy. Dr. Cross, her assistant Dr. Pete Miller, called out. Long-range sensors are picking up those energy signatures again. Whatever is out there, it's big. Nina smiled. The Council had always told everyone that nothing existed beyond the galactic rim. It was empty space, they said, dangerous and worthless. But human probes had detected massive energy sources in that supposedly empty region. The Council had been lying about more than just human rights. Back on Council Station Nexus Prime, emergency meetings were happening in every chamber. The news of humanity's withdrawal had spread across the galaxy in hours. Councillor Veltar stood before the other Council members, trying to maintain order. This is a temporary setback, Veltar said in its musical voice. Humans are emotional creatures. When they realize they cannot survive alone, they will come back begging for readmission. But the Metal Spider Councillor, Zexhai, disagreed. Intelligence reports indicate this was planned for years. They have been building ships and stockpiling supplies. This was not an emotional decision. The worst news came from the intelligence division. The hegemony mining guilds had stopped following production quotas. The aquatic pelagics had expanded into 3 new star systems without asking permission. On 6 different Council worlds, protests were demanding answers about why humans had been so restricted. Commander Kate Wright read the intelligence reports from her ship, the UES Liberty. As head of human intelligence operations, she had been feeding information to the Independence Protocol for years. Now she was seeing the results of their work. Ma'am, her communications officer said, we're getting coded messages from non-human sources. Someone calling themselves the Free Traders. Alliance wants to establish contact, Kate smiled. The Free Traders were smugglers and independent merchants who operated outside Council law. They had always been friendly to humans because humans asked fewer questions and paid better prices. If they were reaching out now, it meant the galaxy's black market was ready to support human independence. On the Council world of Zeridian Prime, something unprecedented was happening. The local Zeridian population was holding protests outside the planetary government building. They were demanding to know why humans had been kept on only 3 worlds while other species had hundreds. Zeridian leader Colvin watched the crowds from his office window. For decades, his people had accepted Council rule without question. Now they were asking why. The humans had done something that no one thought was possible. They had said no to the Council and survived. Sir, his aide said nervously, the crowds are getting larger. They want answers about resource allocation. They want to know why we need Council permission for everything. Colvin sighed. The humans had started something that could not be stopped. By walking away, they had shown every species in the galaxy that the Council's power was not absolute. Admiral Jack Miller sat in his cabin aboard the UES Defiant and read the latest reports. The Council was trying to impose economic sanctions on humanity. They were threatening military action. They were doing everything they had always done when someone challenged their authority. But this time was different. Other species were watching. Other species were starting to ask questions. The rigid control that had kept the galaxy stable for 3,000 years was beginning to crack. "Admiral," Captain Hayes said over the intercom, "we're receiving a priority message from the Frontier Expedition. Captain Blake says they've made contact with something out there. Something that's been waiting for us." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. The humans had gambled everything on the belief that there was more to the galaxy than what the Council allowed them to see. If they were right, it would change everything. If they were wrong, humanity might have just signed its own death warrant. Either way, there was no turning back now. Across the galaxy, the old order was starting to collapse. Species that had never questioned Council authority were beginning to wonder what else they had been told was impossible. The humans had opened a door that could never be closed again, and, somewhere in the void between galaxies, something ancient was stirring in response to humanity's bold move into the unknown. 6 months had passed since the human convoy left the galaxy behind. Captain Tony Blake stood on the bridge of the UES Frontier and stared at something that should not exist. In front of them, floating in the empty void between galaxies, was a structure so massive it made entire star systems look small. "How big is that thing?" Tony asked his navigation officer. Lieutenant Carl Davis checked his instruments twice before answering. "Sir, it's approximately the size of Earth's moon, but it's not natural. Someone built this." The structure looked like a crystal flower made of light and metal. Patterns of energy flowed across its surface in colors that had no names. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Most importantly, it was scanning them. "Captain," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a signal. It's not using any language in our database, but the universal translator is trying to process it." Tony took a deep breath. This was the moment that would either save humanity or destroy them. "Put it through." A voice filled the bridge. It sounded old beyond measure, but somehow gentle. "Welcome, children of Earth. We have been waiting for you." Dr. Nina Cross floated in the zero-gravity observation deck of the UES Discovery and watched as more structures became visible in the distance. What they had thought was one massive station was actually hundreds of them, spread across thousands of light years. An entire civilization existed in the void between galaxies. Dr. Cross, her assistant Dr. Pete Miller, said over the radio, "The alien ship approaching us doesn't match any known Council designs. It's something completely different." Nina watched as a ship unlike anything she had ever seen glided toward their convoy. It moved without engines, flowing through space like a living thing. When it stopped beside the Discovery, a beam of light connected the two vessels. "This is Commander Kate Wright," came a voice over the radio. "I'm leading the contact team. Dr. Cross, you're with me." Kate floated through the light beam and found herself in a chamber that defied understanding. The walls were alive with flowing patterns of light. The air itself seemed to sparkle with energy, and waiting for them was something that looked like a mixture of pure light and ancient wisdom. "I am called the Keeper," the being said without moving what might have been its mouth. "I speak for those you would call the architects. We built these stations long before your galaxy was fully formed." Kate had trained for first contact scenarios, but nothing had prepared her for this. "Why are you here? Why have you been waiting?" "For us?" The Keeper's form shifted like flowing water. "We are explorers as you are. We watch young civilizations develop and grow, but we have been waiting for something specific, a catalyst species."
"One that would break the cycles of stagnation that plague all galaxies." Dr. Nina Cross stepped forward. "What do you mean by catalyst species?" "Your people have a gift," the Keeper explained. "You refuse to accept limitations that others see."
As natural law. When told something is impossible, you find a way to make it possible. When told you must obey, you choose freedom instead. This trait is rare and precious. The Keeper gestured, and the chamber around them filled with images. They saw the history of their galaxy, but not the version the Council had taught. They saw dozens of species that had once been explorers and innovators, all gradually tamed and controlled by the Council's system. The Galactic Council was created during a time of war and chaos, the Keeper continued. It was meant to bring peace and stability, but stability became stagnation. Peace became control. The Council forgot that growth requires the freedom to make mistakes. Kate felt her heart racing. You're saying the Council was never supposed to be permanent? Correct. It was meant to guide young species until they could stand on their own. Instead, it became a system that kept all species as children forever. Your people are the first in 3 millennia to mature enough to walk away. Back in the galaxy, the Council was facing its worst crisis in history. On 17 different worlds, populations were demanding answers about why humans had been so restricted. The carefully maintained balance of power was crumbling. Admiral Jack Miller sat in a secure communication chamber aboard the UES Defiant and listened to reports from across the galaxy. The hegemony had officially declared independence from the Council. 3 more species had withdrawn from Council oversight. Most shocking of all, even some of the founding Council species were questioning the system. Admiral, Captain Hayes said, entering the chamber. We just received a message from Councillor Veltar. The Council wants to negotiate. They're offering humanity full membership, expanded territory, even access to restricted technologies. Jack laughed bitterly. Too little, too late. They had 50 years to treat us as equals. Now they want to bargain because they're scared. The truth was the Council had good reason to be scared. Without the humans to blame for being dangerous and unpredictable, other species were starting to ask why they needed so many restrictions. The Melodians had withdrawn into isolation, refusing to follow Council trade regulations. The warrior species called the Karnath had begun expanding their territory without asking permission. On the Council world of Vexus, riots had broken out. When the local population learned that their government had been hiding the existence of dozens of habitable worlds, the Council had kept them overcrowded and dependent, while empty planets sat unused just to maintain control. Dr. Alan Porter stood in the laboratory aboard the UES Innovation and studied the data streaming in from the architect stations. What he was seeing changed everything humans thought they knew about physics, engineering, and the nature of reality itself. This is incredible, he said to his research team. They're showing us technologies that could revolutionize space travel, faster than light communication, matter conversion, even what looks like dimensional manipulation. But the most important information wasn't about technology. The architects were sharing historical records that the Council had hidden or destroyed. Star charts showing thousands of unexplored systems, records of ancient civilizations that had been wiped from galactic memory. Evidence of resources and opportunities that the Council had kept secret to maintain artificial scarcity. Commander Kate Wright stood with the Keeper in a chamber that showed the entire galaxy in real time. She could see the chaos spreading across Council space as the rigid system of control collapsed. Your species has done what we hoped, the Keeper said. You have shown others that the cage door was never locked. They simply needed someone brave enough to test it. But what happens now? Kate asked. The galaxy is falling apart. No, the Keeper corrected gently. The galaxy is growing up. Chaos often comes before true growth. Your people understand this. You embrace change instead of fearing it. The Keeper showed her images of human colonies already being established in the void between galaxies. Ships from other species were starting to arrive, following the path humans had opened. Former Council species were working together in ways that had been forbidden for centuries. The Council kept everyone focused on competition for limited resources in the galactic core, the Keeper explained. But the universe is vast and full of opportunities. Your people are showing others how to look beyond what they were told was possible. Kate watched as more ships arrived at the architect stations. Not just human ships, but vessels from a dozen different species. All of them were refugees from the Council's dying system of control. Captain Tony Blake received an urgent message from Earth. President Clark was reporting that delegations from 43 different species had requested meetings with human representatives. Some wanted to join the human exodus, Others wanted to establish trade relationships outside council oversight. All of them were asking the same question: how did humans find the courage to leave? The answer was simple, Tony thought. Humans had never really accepted that they needed permission to be free. They had spent 50 years trying to work within the council system, but when that system proved impossible to reform, they had simply walked away. Now the entire galaxy was learning the same lesson. Freedom wasn't something that could be granted by others. It was something you took for yourself. 2 years had passed since humanity walked out of the Galactic Council, and the galaxy looked completely different. Captain Steve Morris stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty and watched as ships from dozens of species worked together to build something that would have been impossible under Council rule. They were constructing New Geneva Station in orbit around a star that the Council had declared off limits for centuries. The star system was rich with rare metals and had 7 habitable planets. The Council had kept it empty, claiming it was too dangerous for colonization. Now they knew the truth. The Council had been hoarding the best systems for themselves. "Captain," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the surface. Dr. Amy Foster says they've made another breakthrough with the ancient ruins." Steve smiled. Dr. Foster had been studying the ruins on the 4th planet for months. The architects had told them that this system once belonged to a highly advanced civilization that had disappeared long before the Council existed. The ruins were full of technologies that could change everything. On the planet below, Dr. Foster knelt beside a massive crystal structure that hummed with barely contained energy. Her team of scientists included not just humans, but also former Council species who had joined the Coalition of Free Worlds. Working together, they had learned more in 2 years than the Council had discovered in centuries. "The translation is complete," said Dr. Yara Keth, a former Council scientist from the crystalline Vortani species. This civilization developed technology for traveling between dimensions. They could literally step into alternate realities. Dr. Foster nodded excitedly. And according to these records, they didn't disappear. They transcended. They found a way to exist in multiple dimensions at once. The ruins told a story that the Council had tried to erase from history. The galaxy had gone through cycles of growth and stagnation for millions of years. Advanced civilizations would develop, explore, and push the boundaries of what was possible. Then controlling governments would arise, promising safety and stability. These governments would gradually restrict exploration and innovation until the civilization stopped growing and started dying. "Look at this," Dr. Foster said, pointing to symbols carved into the crystal. They left a message. "For those who come after, remember that the cage is only as strong as your willingness to remain inside it." Meanwhile, in what used to be Council space, the old order was collapsing completely. The Zephyrians and Vortani, the 2 species that had founded the Council, found themselves ruling over empty stations and abandoned worlds. Most of their subject species had declared independence and left to join the growing coalition of free worlds. Councillor Veltar stood alone in the massive chamber where the Council used to meet. Only 3 of the original 12 councillors remained. The others had either been overthrown by their own people or had fled to distant systems. The great experiment in galactic government had failed. "Perhaps," Veltar said to the empty room, "we should have listened when the humans said they wanted to be partners instead of subjects." But it was too late for regrets. The galaxy had moved beyond the need for the Council's kind of control. Independent species were forming new alliances based on mutual benefit rather than forced compliance. Trade flowed freely between systems that had been kept apart for centuries. Innovation flourished without bureaucratic oversight. President Susan Clark, now serving her 2nd term, stood in the observation deck of New Geneva Station and watched ships arrive from across the galaxy. What had started as humanity's desperate gamble had become the foundation for a new kind of galactic civilization. "Madam President," her aide said, approaching with a datapad, "the latest reports from the exploration fleets. Captain Blake has discovered 17 new star systems beyond the galactic rim. All of them have planets suitable for colonization." Susan smiled. The coalition now included over 100 species, and they were expanding faster than anyone had thought possible. Without the Council's artificial restrictions, they were discovering that the universe was far larger and more welcoming than they had been told. General Frank Stone walked through the corridors of Freedom Base, humanity's new military headquarters built in the void between galaxies. The base was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built using human durability, architect energy technology, and innovations from dozens of former Council species. General, Colonel Bob Williams reported, the defense fleet is ready, 40 ships, from 12 different species, all working under unified command. Frank nodded. Not everyone in the galaxy was happy about the Council's collapse. Some of the more aggressive species were trying to fill the power vacuum through conquest rather than cooperation. The coalition had to be ready to defend the freedom. They had won. But the real strength of the coalition wasn't its military. It was the simple fact that species who had been kept ignorant of each other for centuries were finally free to share knowledge and resources. The aquatic pelagics were teaching others about underwater mining techniques. The insectoid hegemony shared their expertise in large-scale construction. Humans contributed their talent for adaptability and their refusal to accept limitations. Commander, Kate Wright stood with the Keeper in the Architect station that had become the unofficial capital of the new galactic order. Around them, representatives from dozens of species worked on projects that would have been forbidden under Council rule. Your people have exceeded our expectations, the Keeper said in its ancient voice. We thought it would take generations for the galaxy to recover from the Council's influence. Instead, it has taken less than 3 years. Kate watched as a group of young beings from different species worked together on a terraforming project. They had never known the Council's restrictions, so they simply assumed that cooperation between species was natural. What happens now? Kate asked. Do the architects take over where the Council left off? The Keeper's form shimmered with what might have been amusement. No. Our role is to observe and occasionally guide. We learned long ago that true growth cannot be controlled or directed. It must be chosen freely. Admiral Jack Miller, now in his 70s, sat in his garden on New Earth, one of the first human colonies established in Coalition space. He was writing his memoirs, trying to capture the story of how humanity's simple refusal to accept limitations had changed an entire galaxy. His granddaughter, 8-year-old Lucy Miller, sat beside him coloring pictures of the different alien species she had met. To her, having friends from a dozen different worlds was perfectly normal. She had never lived in a galaxy where species were kept separate and suspicious of each other. Grandpa, Lucy asked, why were the old aliens so mean to everyone? Jack thought for a moment before answering. They weren't mean, sweetheart. They were scared. They thought that if people were free to make their own choices, everything would fall apart. But it didn't fall apart, Lucy said confidently. It got better. Jack smiled and ruffled her hair. Yes, it did get better. Much better. The final chapter of the story was being written not in grand political chambers, but in small moments like this. Children growing up in a galaxy where cooperation was normal. Scientists sharing discoveries across species barriers. Traders and explorers pushing into regions that had been forbidden for millennia. The Council had tried to create stability through control, but they had only created stagnation. Real stability came from growth, adaptation, and the freedom to try new things. The galaxy was more peaceful now than it had ever been under Council rule, not because a central authority enforced peace, but because free species chose to work together rather than fight. And at the center of it all, humanity continued to do what it did best. They refused to accept that something could not be done, could not be improved, or could not be changed. They had walked out of one room and, in doing so, had opened the door to an entire universe of possibilities. Years later, when historians tried to understand how such a massive change had happened so quickly, they always came back to the same simple truth. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up and say no to change everything. The humans had said no to limitations, and the galaxy had said yes to freedom.